Hey guys, thank you for tuning in again. This video is going to be almost like a podcast. It's going to be more audio than visual because I want to discuss a concept and I want to get it out there. I want to define it. And in my last video, I talked about my general purpose kind of go-to rifle. And I've really been trying to define its role and purpose in the last week or so, and even went back, kind of did some studying. And I want to define this because I think it's important to define something like this in the current era where we are, not base it off of other historical stuff completely, at least. There's going to be a lot of similarities between what Lieutenant Colonel Jeff Cooper first called his general purpose rifle and then later the scout rifle concept. And the definition and characteristics of a scout rifle are pretty much rigid about, at least pertaining to the rifle itself. And so I really didn't want to venture into that discussion because there are very devoted followers of Lieutenant Colonel Cooper out there, and they have very strong opinions on the scout rifle, and I respect quite a few of them, and I know some of them personally. And so to avoid kind of stepping on their toes, so to speak, but also, I'm not going to use the term scout rifle, but I'm also wanting to use a different term so that way we can be a little more open to other possibilities without worrying about a rigid set of specifications. And so Lieutenant Colonel Cooper, I think at the time when he wrote his scout rifle concept, it was a very interesting concept. It's always interested me. And for my teaching of fieldcraft and study of fieldcraft, I think there's a lot of room there for the scout rifle. I think the scout rifle was actually really designed to be used out in the field. It's not a range weapon specifically. It's not a competition weapon. It's not a specific hunting rifle. It's really a great general purpose weapon, but because of its rigid kind of definition, it's also trapped and not able to adapt to the changing times a little bit. And so the scout rifle, as Lieutenant Colonel Cooper defined it, was meant for a scout, a person that does scouting. And so what I want to do first is kind of define what that person is. Who is the scout? And so the following I'm going to read to you real quick is from the book, The Art of the Rifle, by Lieutenant Colonel Jeff Cooper. It's available on my blog library in PDF format. So I'm going to quote him here now. Back in my high school days, the Scouting and Patrolling Manual in the ROTC battalion stated as follows. The scout is a man trained in ground and cover, movement from cover to cover, rifle marksmanship, map reading, observation, and accurately reporting the results of his observation. The scout, therefore, was a man by himself or possibly with one companion. He was not supposed to get into fights, but if he could not avoid contact, he was expected to shoot quickly, accurately, and hard. His weapon, therefore, could be somewhat more specialized than that of the line soldier. What he needed was a scout rifle." End quote. And so here we have Lieutenant Colonel Cooper kind of defining what he was defining, the role of the scout itself. Now, there's more modern documents out there that are still talking about scouting. It's not a bygone concept. And so the following is from Marine Corps Tactical Publication 3TAC-01A, Scouting and Patrolling, which is also available in my library. Quote, "Scouting involves the effective observation of the operational environment, collecting tactically relevant information, interpreting what is important, and accurately reporting those observations. Scouts actively search for threats and determine their intentions, locations, habits, tactics, and patterns of life, as well as other critical environmental factors which contribute to the unit commander's understanding of the operational environment. Effective scouting begins at the individual level and applies to all types and sizes of patrols, ranging from fire teams to platoon-sized elements. Scouting requires proficiency in observation, optical equipment, tracking skills, the use of weapons, cover and concealment, movement, and route selection. Proficiency in these skills under daylight or limited visibility conditions is necessary. And that's the end of that quote. And so we have two very good definitions, pretty similar to each other, on who the scout is. And the scout rifle obviously was meant for the scout. But Lieutenant Colonel Cooper also talked about his general purpose rifle concept, which was slightly different, and I think it got rolled into one. And it was more pertaining to the ability of a rifle to be useful at close and medium ranges on any target. And I believe he had mentioned it up to 200 kilograms, which is, I believe, 440 pounds. And so you kind of have this meshing of both this kind of light infantry scouting role combined with that of a hunter. And you end up with what has been called the scout rifle. Now, like I said, I'm trying to get away from the term scout rifle and general purpose rifle, mainly out of respect for those who have well defined that. And so what I want to do is go to the brainstorming document that I put up, which is available on my library as well. And this is going to be my kind of brainstorm for what I'm calling my practical bush rifle. You know, it's a rifle with very similar intentions to Cooper's scout rifle, but I am going to define it in a way that allows us to look at other possibilities, and it's not so rigid. You know, and really these are my own requirements when I'm selecting a rifle. These are the things that I'm looking for in my go-to rifles. So the first section I'd like to discuss actually doesn't have to do with the rifle itself, but the person. You know, this rifle is meant to be used by a rifleman. It's not meant for amateurs. It's not a training rifle. It really is meant to be used by a rifleman, which, as a Marine infantryman, a rifleman really is a person that's a inherent characteristic of people who are very good at using a rifle. You know, that's what you would call them as a rifleman. A surgeon is a surgeon. A pianist is a pianist. And a rifleman is a rifleman. And so some of these characteristics, first off, he's a protector and a provider. You know, he takes his masculine role as protector and provider seriously and doesn't outsource his family's well-being to others. He's willing to take the responsibility for their security and their sustenance. And I think the rifle is one of the tools that has allowed us as men for the last couple hundred years to do that. Next, he has a strong understanding of his weapon's physical characteristics. And that is actually a separate topic that I'm going to cover here in a minute. He has excellent fieldcraft. There's more to being a rifleman than shooting a rifle. Mastering fieldcraft gives you the ability to employ the rifle where it is actually needed, out in the field, instead of just at the range. Next, he has excellent weapons handling. Excellent weapons handling is the mark of a professional. And that is just, it's the safe and professional use and carrying of his weapon at all times. He's not flagging other people or pointing it at other people. He's always pointing it in a safe direction. He knows what condition his rifle's in, what condition the safety's in, etc. He has a mastery of the fundamentals of marksmanship, the ABCs, which is aiming, breathing, and trigger control. He displays brilliance in the basics because there are no high-speed skills. He's physically capable of employing his weapon in the field. He's not out of shape or unhealthy. He takes care of his body, he respects his body, and he keeps it at a state of readiness so that if he has to, he can go to work, so to speak. He's mentally and spiritually prepared. He understands that if he must use his rifle, it is for good reason. He should have a warrior's mentality. He's not out to destroy like a psychopath, and he uses his rifle for the benefit of his family and community. You know, it's the pray for peace and prepare for war, and have gratitude and delight in the beautiful. You know, some of the people I think who understand and can see the most beauty in life are the people who have seen the most ugliness in life as well. And so that's having a warrior's mentality. He should have a strong understanding of his target. He should study his target's traits and characteristics so that he knows best how to engage it. He keeps himself and his equipment ready at all times. Like I said, he keeps himself physically prepared and mentally prepared, and also keeps his equipment prepared. He has a strong understanding of how best to employ his weapon, both offensively and defensively. He has a good grasp of practical and applicable tactics, and he's well trained in leadership and planning as well. And he's capable of working within a team to accomplish objectives. He knows when to lead, and he knows when to follow. He's capable of teaching others the craft, that is, rifle craft. And he's dedicated to his craft. We jokingly call it the cult of the rifle because he takes it that seriously. All right, now we can start talking about the rifle itself. I just want to go over some very general characteristics before we start getting into specifics. The rifle itself should be just a rifleman's dream. It should be his dream rifle almost. It should be handy and friendly. And Colonel Cooper described friendly as the greatest single asset of the personal rifle, to my mind, is that it be friendly. This is a difficult quality to describe because it is essentially a subjective matter. Nonetheless, it is very important. Your rifle should be your intimate friend and favorite companion. If you do not enjoy playing with it, walking with it, riding with it, it is just not right for you. And so to me, one of my friendliest rifles, so to speak, is just my Marlin 30-30. It is. It's an absolute joy to shoot. It's fun to shoot. I don't know, something about, running the lever and firing the 30-30. It's just a fun gun to shoot. It's a great rifle to carry, but it doesn't quite fit the criteria that we're going to talk about. The next characteristic is it should be lightweight, and I'm not going to give an exact number right here, but really by lightweight, we're talking about the fact that it shouldn't encumber us as we move through the terrain with all of our gear on, because that's the thing. We have to think about this in the context of a field environment. So you're probably carrying a pack with food and shelter and so on, with water, and we don't need any extra weight to carry. It should be accurate enough, which means we should be able to hit what we are shooting for as long as we do our part, which applies to the mechanical accuracy of the rifle as well as the repeatability of the optics and the ammo. So kind of the whole system together. As long as we do the best we can, there shouldn't be any issues with the round hitting where we want it to go. It should also be powerful enough. The round should do the damage we need it to do when it hits the target where we want. The rifle system should be rugged, and it shouldn't need to be babied all the time. It should be able to take a drop if necessary, although you should never drop your rifle, but if it were to happen, it shouldn't break or be at any high risk of not working anymore. It should be easy to stabilize and carry in the field. In other words, it should be easy to get into a good field firing position with the rifle, and also to carry the rifle at all times in the field. One of the most ungainly rifles I ever carried was an M16A4 with the full rail on the front and an M203 on the front. It just was a ridiculous setup that was so front heavy that shooting with it was a pain. And it was a pain to carry it too. I would rather carry a machine gun than one of those. Next, the rifle system should be reliable. In other words, it should produce consistent results. It should be easy to maintain and a simple operating system. The simpler the rifle is, the easier it will be to maintain in the field and to teach others how to use it. And it should have quick and accurate sighting. The sighting system, whatever it is, should allow the shooter to get hits on target quickly and easily. It should also have a familiar and simple manual of arms. And what that means is your manual of arms is how you load and unload and aim the rifle. And there's been rifles out there that have very weird loading and unloading techniques compared to most rifles. And so I think, a rifle like this shouldn't have any special, unique stuff like that. So jumping over to the other side of the page real quick, I want to talk about logistics. The rifle should be financially and logistically possible to support, because there's a cost of ownership that goes along with a rifle and developing yourself to become a rifleman. Just like there's a cost of ownership with owning a vehicle. When you get that car off the lot, that's not the last day that you're going to have to spend money on that thing. You're going to have to put gas in it, and oil and tires, etc. And so just like with that vehicle, there's a cost of ownership. And so we have to be able to actually financially do it. So at the top, it should be easy to carry enough ammo to defend yourself with. Now that's going to be MET-TC dependent. And MET-TC is a planning acronym that we used in the military, and it stands for mission, enemy, time available, troops available, terrain and weather, and civilian concerns. And you might see a few different variations on that, but essentially you need to be looking at your situation and to decide, well, how much ammunition is that? If all I'm worried about is defending myself from a stray dog or a coyote, maybe 5 rounds is enough. But if we have some sort of crazy situation going on and there's marauders or gangsters or whatever running around, maybe 60 rounds is enough. So it needs to be easy enough to carry that ammunition. If your practical bush rifle's a .338 Lapua and you determine that you need to carry 100 rounds of ammunition, it's going to be pretty hard to carry that. Next is a very important bullet point. I think the owner should be able to afford at least 200 practice rounds per year, assuming they're a competent rifleman. Once again, if your ammunition costs $4 a round, are you going to be willing to invest $800 a year just for practice? And that's assuming you're already a competent rifleman. If you're wanting to become a competent rifleman, you might bump that up to 1,000 rounds the first year. And with today's ammo prices, that's not going to be easy for some. Next, the owner can afford to store 1,000 rounds minimum. This is so that you have ammunition ready to go, so that if you need it for any real situations, you've got it. You don't have to go down to the hardware store and buy it. Too many people shop for rifles based off what the latest and greatest, flattest shooting, highest energy cartridges are, and they're going to pay a high premium for that, high-end, super deluxe round. It doesn't make much sense to me to spend $2,000 on a rifle that you can't afford to shoot. That's where the original scout rifle concept basically settled on the .308. It's not a bad idea. .308 ammunition is very commonplace, but I wouldn't limit yourself to .308 either. And as we're going to discuss, there's probably other rounds that you can use. Next, I put common man, common sense. In other words, this rifle should make sense to own. Do you need a belt-fed, super crazy stuff, or should it just be common man, common sense? Buy the best quality that you can afford. That's called being common man and having common sense, just like buying any other tools. Next, the owner should be able to afford 2 times the amount of magazines normally carried. And so what that means is, if we're normally carrying a certain amount of magazines, that the magazines shouldn't be so expensive that if I lose one, I don't have any spares. All right? Just like ammunition, as you expend it, you want to be able to replace it. You also want to have magazines, because as much as it sucks, magazines can get lost, damaged, and so on. And so we want to be able to replace those. And we don't always have the option to just go down to the hardware store and buy more magazines. I think we've all seen in the last couple years how supply chain disruptions can affect both the price and availability of these things. And so you're a lot better off buying them now while they're plentiful, assuming they are. And so you got to look at that price. If your if the rifle you think you want, if the magazines cost $100 a piece for it, it's not going to take long, and you're going to have more value in the magazines than you will in the rifle itself. And so that's kind of a losing proposition in my mind. Next, ammunition should normally be readily available. Okay, once again, this means I should be able to go down to the local Walmart or Farm and Fleet type stores and get ammunition. I shouldn't have to order custom super deluxe ammo from some retailer halfway across the country. It doesn't necessarily mean that this ammunition is always going to be your preferred, best, most accurate load, but at least you can put it in the gun and it will function. Next, the ammunition should be easily hand loaded for. And by easily, I mean both there's different cartridges out there that are very easy to hand load for, meaning you're going to get good results with almost any components that you use as long as you're not blowing the thing up. But also there's ammunition out there that requires a lot of powder, and there's ammunition out there that requires less powder or primers. Look at, if you're going to hand load, if your particular round requires a large rifle Magnum primer, well, good luck finding those right now. So you look at the components. What's going to be easy to replace? Next, there should be no special maintenance needs for the rifle. Basically, this is just going in line with keeping things simple. Keeping it simple because you don't want to have more things to think about. Okay? Next, replacement parts should be easily obtained. Things like firing pins and whatnot eventually break. Might not be a bad idea to buy one or two now to store. If the rifle that you're using is already a rarity and 90 years old, maybe it's time to think about a different weapon system. And that kind of leads me to the last point, where it's not a high-value collector or prized piece. If you're not willing to go out and live 3, 4, 5 days out in the field and get that rifle muddy and dirty and a little bit rusty if it gets rained on and so on, that's probably not your go-to practical bush rifle, all right? Okay, guys, so finally, last but not least, we're actually going to talk about the physical characteristics of the go-to bush rifle. First off, I think it should have a minimum 10-round detachable magazine. And that can be 5 if you live in an area where maybe those types of magazines aren't looked on favorably. And this is all MET-TC dependent, of course. Now, depending on the environment, even where I live, I may choose to put a 5-round in just so that my rifle looks a little less tactical, I guess. Nobody says I can't store higher capacity magazines out of sight on my person so that if I should want to switch to that, I can easy enough. So it's just something to think about. Next, we should have an appropriate muzzle device for, once again, the MET-TC analysis. So I think to not use a muzzle device at all is kind of a mistake. I think they usually generate some sort of added benefit, whether we're talking about flash hiders or muzzle brakes. Personally, I pretty much put a flash hider on everything because I'm more interested in the security use of a weapon a lot of times, and I don't shoot heavy enough caliber rifles usually that a muzzle brake is really much benefit for me, but you may feel differently. Next, it should have built-in permanent iron sights that are max point blank range effective. So this is probably where I'm going to lose a lot of people, but just hear me out. I know nowadays we are living in a renaissance of rifle scopes and optics right now, and you can have the highest quality, best built stuff, especially if you're willing to pay some money. You can have amazing scopes compared to what were available 20, 30 years ago. And now this was also a requirement on the original Scout rifles because Colonel Cooper knew that the scopes of that era were not they weren't impervious to damage, and he wanted to have that effective sighting method as a backup. And I don't disagree with that. I've seen plenty of scopes break myself, but instead of just backup sights, I like the idea of a rifle having its own set of sights. It's kind of like having laces on boots, I guess, to me, where regardless of whether or not there's an optic available or whether or not it's broken or whatever the case may be, if the rifle has a set of iron sights, organically built into it, so to speak, it's a useful rifle. Rifles without any sights at all are pretty useless. And so that rifle can be used in a lot of ways, at least to defend and once again, protect and provide, so to speak, as long as it has a good set of iron sights. And so if it's max point blank range effective, that just means that by placing that front sight post appropriately, center mass on a target out to a certain distance, it's going to basically hit it where it will kill it. You know, if we're talking about a deer or a human being, in the case of defensive uses, you know, that max point blank range is just a distance where, you know, I can put the sights on and pull the trigger, and I don't have to worry about elevation and holdover. A famous kind of example of that to me would be in the Marine Corps with the M16. We had what was called a 36-300 zero, which basically at close distance, 36 yards, we zeroed our sights at 36 yards, and the trajectory of the round would cross that same point, that same line of sight at 36 yards at 300 yards. And so we knew out to 300 yards, all we had to do was put the front sight post on, center mass, and pull the trigger. Okay, next, I like to have onboard maintenance and ballistic data storage. You know, I talked about that triad tactical butt pack. I like to have those weapon-specific items on the weapon, not just floating around in my backpack somewhere. Next, we need a durable magnified optic. In the bush, now granted, if you're in thick trees and thick other areas, that might be different. This might be different for you, but past 150 yards, you need magnification to identify targets, whether it's a pair of binoculars or a scope on your rifle. And it seems to me from my experiences during rifle marksmanship training with the students that a minimum of 1 to 1.5 power per 100 yards seems to be a good balance of having enough power to ID the targets and engage the targets without having way more power than what you need to where your field of view is small and also to where the rifle's like encumbered once again. So that's what we're trying to avoid. Next, it should be a general purpose optic designed to deliver quick sighting at close range as well as medium range. A lot of the ACSS optics by Primary Arms are built just for this, and I think they're a great option. And there's others out there as well. And I would be willing to make exceptions here that, you know, if you have some sort of sighting system, you know, like the offset red dot sights, for example, I might be willing to say, okay, if you have a 4 to 16 power optic and then an offset red dot, you know, I'd be willing to entertain that idea. I'm not going to be so strict on my definition here, but there is also weight that we're trying to stay under, and I'll go over that here in a minute. Next, you should utilize quick detach optic mounts, and that's so that if something goes wrong with the optic, you can remove it to use the irons quickly, but also so that it will allow you to utilize different types of optics that have been zeroed to the rifle, and which is another bullet point further down, but we should all be using Picatinny optics bases, so that way we get repeatable zero with Picatinny mounts. That way if I want to switch between a red dot and a higher magnification optic, or maybe at night I want to slap a thermal on, or night vision scope, I can do those things. Next, we want a rifle that doesn't draw a lot of attention, and this is that MET TC. We just want it to look like a normal rifle. It doesn't have to be flashy with super cool paint jobs or, you know, like I said, this is going to be MET TC dependent. You're going to have to kind of evaluate your operating environment to see what just kind of blends in. Next, it should have a good consistent trigger. I'm not going to give a weight poundage or anything like that, but as long as you can shoot the rifle to its potential, I'd say that's good enough. Next, we want to have an easily adjustable shooting sling that functions well for carrying in rough terrain. All right, so easily adjustable. That means I should be able to slide a buckle and quickly lengthen or shorten the sling so that I can carry it in whatever position I need to without having to disassemble the sling and undo buckles or tri-glides or whatever. And as a shooting sling, it should offer me support. That way I can enhance my accuracy in the field. Next, there's a bullet point that I need to get added to this, and that it should have the ability to be able to mount a white light. The white light doesn't have to be on all the time, depending on the circumstances, but you should be able to put a white light on it for defensive use. Next, we want a optic that helps us compensate for range, either with a BDC or good turrets that we can dial, or with some sort of milling or grid reticle to help us hold over. And as a bonus, if like the ACSS reticles, if they have built-in windage compensation as well, that's all the better. Like I previously stated, we want a Picatinny optics base. That way we have a universal mounting platform so we can swap optics as we want to. Back on the stock, we want to have a good cheek weld when using the optic. So when we have whatever optic we're going to use mounted, the stock needs to be able to provide us with a good cheek weld. We want a quick detach bipod. I don't like carrying a bipod around on the rifle all the time, but I do like having the capability if I need it. Normally my bipod rides around in my day pack or whatever pack I'm carrying, and I put it on if the situation permits it. Next is our weight number, and I'm shooting for 8 pounds or less. You know, that's including optics, sling, the whole 9 yards, with 10 rounds of ammunition. You know, that's going back to having a lightweight and handy rifle. Next, I'm going to define accuracy as 2 MOA with hunting ammo. So with the kind of ammunition that you would use to take game with, it should shoot 2 MOA. Next, instead of defining energy or something like that, I'm going to say that the bullet should be traveling 1,800 feet per second still until it at least 350 yards. Now, my 6.5 Grendel basically barely makes that, but what that does, as I've kind of stated before, a lot of your expanding hunting rounds are designed to work around that 1,800 feet per second minimum, meaning as long as they're traveling 1,800 feet per second, they will expand as designed. And 350 yards is probably the farthest that you should really be attempting a shot, especially if you're trying to shoot animals for sustenance. I think that's, if I just were to go out to try to shoot a deer to eat of any sort, I can usually get way closer than 350 yards. Next, we should have an efficient and minimalist weatherproof stock. So the stock should be what we need and nothing more, and it shouldn't be affected by the weather much. Next, the rifle needs to be easy to stabilize and carry in the field, like we discussed earlier. The action and everything on it needs to function well in very cold weather. Seems like very cold weather seems to do funny things, even to steel, and so we need something that's reliable even in the cold. Now, granted, this is my personal requirements. If you live in the Mojave Desert, you may not have as much of a need for that. It should be capable of being maintained easily in the field with basic equipment. And basic equipment to me is basically a bore brush, an old toothbrush, a little bit of lube, maybe a bore snake, a rag with some oil on it so you can kind of wipe down the surfaces to keep them from rusting. Just basic equipment. We shouldn't need special bore guides and all this other stuff. And lastly, it should be capable of being stored in condition 3, but made condition 1 quickly. And so this is kind of speaking to the idea that we should be able to store the weapon with ammunition on board, but not chambered. And should we need to use the rifle, we can quickly chamber around and engage. So that's kind of going over the total concept of what I'm going to start calling the practical bush rifle. It's not a CQB carbine, it's not an assault weapon, it's not a long-range precision rifle. It is a rifle that you can do a lot of things well with. It's not a specialized rifle, it's just a very useful grab-and-go weapon for me in my region. And so I really want this to be an open discussion. I'd love to hear what other people think, what they're using, what they've used in the past. And feel free to comment below or shoot me an email. Like I said, I love having these discussions. So thanks again for watching. Take care.